Hey there. I'm Chris Sessums, Director of Academic Affairs at D2L, and I'm a recovering faculty member with over 20 years experience teaching and supporting learners in secondary and post-secondary settings, face-to-face and online. And welcome to Between Two Moose, a place where we get to debate trends and topics tied to teaching and learning with technology. And today, our focus is why discussion boards? Why do they suck? Or maybe they don't suck. Maybe it's not their fault. And in order to help me kick off this party, and if you want to get any party kicked off right, you need the inimitable Ken Chapman. He's our Vice President of Market Research at D2L. Welcome to Between Two Moves, Ken.
Thanks, Chris. I'm bringing a bit of a different perspective than Chris does. I'm not a recovering faculty member. I've worked on LMSs ever since I was an undergrad completing my degree online. So I like to say I was raised by wolves with an ed tech. And today, when we talk about whether or not discussions suck and whether or not it's their fault, I want to bring some of the benefit of thousands of conversations that I've had the opportunity to have with faculty and students throughout the years. And Chris, one of the things that I hear most often, and as one of the first, concerns or barriers with quality discussions online, is that it's not a real discussion. It can be slow, it can be time consuming, and it can feel a little bit like a play date, where someone sort of set the stage for me.
Yeah, and that is a reason why discussion boards suck. That would be a good one. I often, in my experience, the way that I tried to envision a discussion board was more of like a dining room table, like a place where friends or family, where we gather and we have a discussion, a real open discussion. And maybe we get off tangent, we get off topic a little bit, but that often leads to more insights. So I know what you mean by it feeling forced. And I know there's ways that we can structure that to make it feel less forced. I'm sure you've probably seen examples too in your travels.
I have, but I mean, even when we achieve that feeling of purpose and we have a community feel, we're around the dining room table, we still miss the interpersonal aspects of it. I don't see body language, when we're in a typical forum. I can't make eye contact. There isn't the same presence there.
I noticed the same thing. And one of the things that I tried doing, and this is going to sound silly, but instead of having students introduce themselves in a discussion at the beginning of the semester by saying, "Hi, I'm so-and-so, and I'm from, here, and this is I love to surf and moonlight walks on the beach." Instead of that so much, I had students use the video that was built into the discussion forum to have to introduce themselves via video, and that I tell you can change the whole game. Everybody became much more excited and wanted to see I could look at the data behind the scenes, so to speak, and see how much more traction the discussion forums were getting when I had students use video as a way to sort of bridge that intimacy gap.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, you get that human connection there. I can see that. So for anybody that's just tuning in, I'm here with Chris Sessums from D2L, and I'm Kenneth Chapman, and we're trying to talk about why discussions can suck and what we can do to improve those. So we can make them purposeful. We can create a sense of engagement and personal connection. But what about really making them valuable from a learning perspective? How do you ensure that there are critical thinking elements in discussions and that it's not just busy work and, a checkbox for participation, right?
Well, that's a great question. And I'm hoping some folks that are tuned in today will share some of their thoughts as well in our discussion, because by all means, I don't pretend to have all the answers. Although if you ask my wife, she'll say, I do pretend to have all the answers. But, one of the things that I find really helpful, that I found really engaging activity to get students more involved and engaged, was I had them create what I'm going to call a problem posting. Whereas I asked them to share and discuss issues that the course that I was teaching wasn't addressing, or maybe that I had left off, that they thought this is really important and I wanted to know more. And when I did that, the students realized, oh, I'm listening and paying attention. And I even created an additional module in my course to provide that extra content that they were really looking for. So I found that in itself gave, by using the discussion forum, the discussion board is a place for students to give me feedback, not only just sort of participating in assignments, but really help inform me and our learning community. It made them feel like they had more ownership.
Right, right.
Which was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. So one of the things that I find, Ken, that I'm curious what you think about. Oftentimes students get really upset when the instructor says, I want you to comment on your peers' work. And students get really mad and say, I don't want to comment on peers' work. I'm paying you, the instructor, to give me feedback.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, yeah. And then, I mean, you run into the pitfalls of, well, you know, I'm going to write the bare minimum of I agree, or, you know, if there's a word count on that, I'm going to try to find a complex sentence that basically says I agree. You know, it's about the instructor really setting out the purpose for the discussion. You know, if students are meant to be moderating each other and moderating each other's ideas, you know, the instructor has to set the stage for that activity and probably model that behavior ahead of time, so students have some exposure to that, and they have an awareness of, you know, some of the examples and the exemplars of exhibiting that behavior. But it's important, you know, for faculty to get that across, that empathy with their fellow students and creating that learning community is far more valuable than just the teacher to student dynamic that would be the default in that case.
I'm so glad to hear you say that, Ken. It's something I know in my life as an educator and someone who taught teachers, is always to remind folks, especially those leading instruction, that they need to remember they're the educative mentor, right? They're the ones that are modeling the behaviors that they should be modeling, the behaviors that they want their students to demonstrate. After all, that's what students are looking to you for as a subject matter expert. They're looking for adult role models. I mean, even adult students are looking for adult role models. You know, you don't have to be older to be an adult role model, but you know.
Absolutely. I mean, another one of the most common things that I hear is I'm working within discussions. I'm sharing my perspective. I'm trying to be reflective on the ideas, but I don't know how I'm being evaluated. I don't know if what I'm doing is what the instructor is expecting.
That's always a tough one. Again, back to that modeling that behavior. One of the things that I found really helped my students was the use of rubrics in the discussion forum. So they knew exactly, I would spell out in the rubric, this is what an A discussion should look like. This is what a B discussion would look like. And frankly, I didn't have any room for, I would show them the non-example, you know, this is a C discussion. Frankly, we don't want to go there. And let's avoid that. So that was one way I found to really keep students on track. But, you know, we could have a similar debate, Ken, about rubrics. And maybe we'll save that for another Between Two Moose. I know a lot of people that love rubrics, and I know people that just trash them. But I think there's a lot of room for discussion around that as well.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you watching, you know, through, you know, like and share if you like what you're hearing, and if there's topics you want to see in the future, we'd love to hear about that. You know, Chris and I, we have a lot of opinions on this stuff. You know, Chris, I think, you know, we talked about how you can design in some of the practices for an effective discussion. Timing and due dates, one of the most difficult and frustrating aspects for students at times. You know, it can be really difficult for your type A personalities that need to reply to their peers' posts. But if everybody's just doing that at the last minute, you know, right before a discussion closes off, it can make that almost impossible, let alone doing it with any quality.
No, you're so right, Ken. That's one of the more frustrating pieces. I've worked at a couple of institutions where there was a standard around discussion posting. So, for example, students were required to post by Friday, and then they were supposed to have a follow-up post to some of the other students' posts by Sunday evening. And it was just so forced, and it felt forced, and students resented it. And yet I understand we want to find ways to engage our students and have them, you know, test their knowledge and check to see that the concepts that we're teaching are sticking, right? So the discussion forum is a good place to do that. But at the same time, I feel like the way we set up assignments sometimes stifles all of that. And I don't know if it really helps students. It feels more like they're just, we're having them check a box,
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's ways, that I know that you can remind students and we can encourage them to do posts, but I know there's got to be better ways than just having that draconian, if you don't respond by this time, I often worry. I understand why that's in place, but I struggle with it.
We've got a question here. It's from Sarah, a teacher from Waterloo. Good points, guys. But she's found them to be really time consuming to create and manage discussions and questions the contributions to learning. What do you think you can do instead?
Wow, Sarah, that's a great question. It really is. It is time consuming. I'm somebody who, when I'm doing online courses, for example, there's a lot of prior planning. At my institution, we're required to basically spend 6 months developing a course before we went live with it. And in that, we literally had to script out all the discussions and how we wanted those to go. You were right, it took an amazing amount of time. And then when you've got a class going actively and you see a discussion going in a direction and maybe you want to take it somewhere else, you've got to be ready to improvise and jump in and maybe go off your script a little bit. So it is challenging. I don't know if there's any shortcuts, Ken, or any techniques that I can think of that aren't as time consuming.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always important to look for opportunities to automate things where possible. I mean, just the little nudges on timing, dates, and an idea that might get your students started or thinking about the topic you want them thinking about. Things like that can typically be automated and sent out to students, through learning management systems and things like that. But it's also important to remember, the forum that online discussions create is very accessible for those that wouldn't be as participative or as maybe insightful or vocal in a typical classroom environment. Those that struggle with English as a second language, those that are more introverted, or those that just need that time to think and noodle on things and may not be ready to engage in the time something's happening synchronously, can really thrive and benefit from conversations that are happening in an online forum and that can be asynchronous.
No, that's a really good point. And I also get, Sarah, when you talk about, are these discussion forums really contributing to learning? And that I agree. If they're not, then we shouldn't be using them. I can give you an example of friends of mine used to teach a forensic sciences course, and it was held with lots of forensic scientists, distributed around the globe. And the discussion forum turned out to be a place where people would share their work stories. And what the most benefit from that forum was for professionals to talk about their jobs. Like, you wouldn't believe this case that I'm dealing with right now. I've got, X, Y, and Z that's going on. Has anyone ever encountered anything like this? So they would actually develop this professional network, this community of practice in that discussion forum, which was mind-blowing. And the professor didn't have to do anything. The forum just took care of itself because people saw it immediately as a networking opportunity, not a forced place to go to do in a forced assignment kind of thing. So that's an interesting way to think about discussion forum as well.
Chris, I got a question came in from Daniel Penner. How do you get students to be the first to post? And any tips on that? That's a good question. I haven't been asked that before.
That is a good question. The incentives to get students to post. I tend to think of it as, if I want students to do something, I need to model it. So I generally model the kind of behavior, and I'll use an announcement post or something to the effect of saying, this is my expectations. These are the ground rules that I'd like to see in this particular forum. And when I express what I'm looking for and what I'm expecting, then I find students, let's face it, a lot of students are very interested in getting the best grade possible. So if I explain to them, if you really want to get the best grade possible, I encourage you to post early and post often as a possible way to get students to post early. What do you think, Ken?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's helpful to recognize the students that are posting first or are particularly engaged. and to promote them, to talk about, to raise up some of their ideas, and again, to show how other students might be modeling that behavior and not just the instructor. I think it's also important to give channels for bringing a student's own ideas in that aren't necessarily structured into topical forums. A lot of learners are used to interacting online and sharing their ideas in whatever format and when they want, how they want type of thing. And forums and topics can feel kind of constrained. So there are other ways that you can have just open-ended opportunities for students to contribute how something they saw in their life or their perspective connects in with a concept being talked about. And then, maybe that's something that can be brought into a formal class-oriented discussion, but that's organized around something the students already showed they cared about.
Well, there again, Ken, you just tied it back to the students' needs and the students' desires. I think that's probably the key to perhaps really creating a more engaging forum, is to have a discussion that really focuses mostly on helping the students rather than maybe as knowledge checking per se, or maybe a combination. Clearly you can do both. But it looks like we're getting about at the 15-minute mark, and it looks like we have time for one more question. It looks like it's from Jill, and Jill wants to know. And by the way, Jill also pointed out that it looked like she's on the ball, that I'm between a moose and I think she said it right, Apatosaurus.
I think it's actually a brachiosaurus. It's got that bony part on its head, but anyways.
You're corrected. Thank you. I appreciate that. I need to get another moose here. So Jill wants to know how instructors can avoid minimal effort responses, like those little attaboy kind of responses. Anything strike you, Ken, in your?
I think we talked a bit about that up front. Where the expectations for the learning activity itself. An attaboy doesn't move the conversation along, doesn't show anything in terms of that learner's viewpoint. I think having a rubric that shows, what does a meaningful and productive response look like? Those are things that are key for students. And if there isn't any real value in having them do a follow-up, then don't grade them, don't evaluate them based on that. So they're not doing that busy work if it's just busy work.
No, that's a great point. As I've mentioned a few times, I think as the instructor, I would always say, this is what I'm expecting. And I give examples to my students. I'm a big fan of example, non-example, right? So here's an example of a really good post that I'm looking for. Here's an example of a not so good post. So by doing that, I give students some ideas of some guidelines as to what I'm looking for. But I found more than anything, if I model it, then they go, okay, that's what he's looking for. That's what I'll aim to give him. So it isn't stifling. I'm trying to model those kinds of behaviors that I want to see in my students. That's part of what I thought they were paying me for.
Well, Chris, this has been amazing on our first episode here. We'd love to know, was this an example or a non-example for you? So please like, share, subscribe, and let us know, what types of topics and conversations you'd like to see from us in the future.
And we look forward to coming back and doing this again. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll hope to see you again next time.